We're joined by Gary Sick of Columbia University. He was principal White House aide during the Carter White House on the issue of Iran during the revolution more than 30 years ago. Professor Sick, as we heard there, what do the people want? What does the opposition movement want, do you think, as it stands today?
You know, that keeps changing because initially what they wanted was simply a recount of the election in June. As the regime has cracked down harder and harder, and they're getting better at it. I mean, repression does work, and they now are much more organized in terms of keeping things quiet and keeping the opposition down than they were before. As they've done that, however, the price that they pay for it is that the demands of the opposition go up.
And yet, it really does seem that since the June election, it's been a constant shadow boxing. Neither side has delivered a knockout punch. No. The regime has not crushed the opposition. The opposition has not changed the regime. Where is it leading?
Well, you know, we watched the Iranian Revolution in 1978 and 79, and the reality is you had no idea where it was going to go, and there was great difference of opinion. And basically, it kind of depends on who blinks first. The regime is trying very hard to give an image that it is unbeatable, that it's strong, that it can't be intimidated, and that it will give nothing. It will give nothing whatsoever to the opposition. The opposition keeps increasing their demands, but again, not, as you say, not able to deliver a knockout punch.
Now, the opposition and the leaders, and there was a lot of hype before today's anniversary, saying that come out onto the streets. In the limited vision that we've had of what happened in Tehran and around Iran today, how do you assess what the opposition achieved today, or what the government achieved?
I think the opposition certainly was there in spots in various places. As I say, the government has gotten better and better at its repressive techniques, and they've identified paths and where the opposition was likely to come. They've closed those off. They had troops surrounding them. They used tear gas at the very earliest site. When their leaders began to appear, as we heard, they beat them up or scare them away or force them to turn back. And as a result, I think it was very sporadic and it was very isolated in terms of what the opposition could do. So in that sense, I would say the regime accomplished its short-term goals. The problem is the short-term goals of repression and holding things down oppose the long-term goals, which would be really long-term legitimacy and support. And basically, they're losing that all the time.
Well, as they lose legitimacy, they're also publicly sort of attacking the descendants of Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the revolution, who have clearly stood with the opposition, with the reform movement. Isn't that an irony today, 31 years later?
You know, it's really astonishing. But, you know, the people who were closest to Khomeini, with the exception of a very, very few people around Khamenei himself, those people have all moved to the reform side. They are all on the side of change, and they all believe that the revolution has not, in fact, met its goals, that it has cheated the people in terms of what it promised and what it actually delivered.
Which is what Mr. Mousavi himself said. He was very close to Ayatollah Khomeini. He was one of the first prime ministers.
And Mr. Mousavi and Mr. Karoubi both have made statements saying, you know, I was a true believer. I really felt that the revolution had accomplished great things, that it was a wonderful future. And both of them now say, but I've changed my mind. It simply isn't true anymore.
There are basically two stories, though, going on about Iran. There's the Iranian government's confrontation with the West over the nuclear issue, and as we've been speaking, the confrontation by the people against the Iranian government and vice versa. How to connect these two stories? Can they be connected? How does the West deal with this right now?
Well, you know, the whole history of U.S.-Iran relations, at least, I'll leave out France and Germany and others, has been that domestic policy is really foreign policy. And that the West has had a very hard time, the U.S. has had a terrible time trying to deal with Iran in any kind of rational way, because we have all those memories of the hostage crisis, we have all of those memories of things that we felt were bad.
But beyond that, the West seems to it seems to be stuck in how harshly to deal with the government over its nuclear issues, not knowing how it's going to affect and how it wants to affect the domestic political situation.
When President Obama originally came up with his idea of engagement and opening up, holding a hand out to Iran, It seemed very attractive.
Would you say it's pretty much failed? It's just
it
hasn't worked?
Well, I would say that he was unwilling to quite follow through on what he said. And the reason that he couldn't really follow through is because of the elections in June, because the sudden uprise of opposition to the government. And so what do you do? Do you go ahead and deal with the government as if nothing has happened? Some people say we should. Or do you say, wait a minute, everything is different than it was before and we have to change our strategy? And I think he's sort of fallen between stools on that.
Let me ask you about strategy. Many people, some of the Iranian think tank groups outside are saying, you've been wasting your time, you in the West, talking just about the nuclear issue. Focus on democracy, focus on human rights. Has the strategy been wrong from the start?
You know, it's nice to say those things, but what do you actually do? I mean, you want to support democracy in Iran. If the United States intervenes in any direct way to assist the people who are out in the streets trying to do something, we basically undercut their legitimacy because then they really do look like Western stooges. So we can say nice words, but that doesn't get anybody very far. The series of things that we can do, which I hope will occur to us at some point, is to make it much easier for Iranians to actually keep the internet open and functioning. If they had a way of getting news out and to actually say what they wanted to say freely on the internet anonymously, you would have a flood of information coming out of Iran that would be really very valuable.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the nuclear issue, Iran, well, you heard President Ahmadinejad today declare that Iran is now a nuclear nation. How this nuclear clock keeps being pushed back. We keep hearing every year that they're going to be at a critical point, and there's so much confusion about it. Where do you think they stand right now, and how is this going to affect the international community?
Well, actually, they're not really any closer than they were 2 years ago. And in fact, their centrifuges are not working very well. They have not made very much progress at all. And of course, Ahmadinejad has been saying for years that Iran was a nuclear nation. He can announce that every time there's a celebration, but the reality is nothing much is happening. And if they've produced a gram of 20% enriched uranium, well, hooray, but it's not a great accomplishment, frankly.
What do you make of what we're hearing about the new updated U.S. National Intelligence Assessment? They're going to say and contradict a 2007 report, and they're going to apparently say that Iran is moving closer towards weaponization again.
As far as I know, those judgments are based on laptop or experiments, the tabletop experiments that people do, where they try out this shape versus that shape and see what would happen in a simulation, simulation of the thing actually happening, without actually carrying out tests. Those, it would be a little strange for things like that not to be done. And that's never astonished me that they would have had somebody looking at a laptop trying to figure out.
Well, let me ask you, you talk about simulation and test games. There has been one recently. How did the U.S. come out?
Oh, well, that was a different simulation. That was a simulation in this country, and it wasn't a scientific test. It was a group of people with a lot of policy experience trying to play out the next year in U.S.-Iran relations. And the result of that, unfortunately, was really very bad for the United States. And I say particularly bad because, in the end, Iran actually ended up stronger than when it started. And the United States, I regret to say, was pursuing exactly the policy that the U.S. is pursuing right now. There was no imagination, nothing new. It was, okay, we can't get along with you, so we're going to try to put on sanctions. They couldn't get sanctions on. They offended all of their friends and enemies, or friends and allies, and at the end of the day, the United States was more isolated than Iran was.
To be continued. Professor Gary Sick, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.